Welcome to How is God Calling You? A production of CTNY, the Catholic television network of Youngstown. It is a show that seeks to stimulate and assist youth and young adults to discover the path that God has chosen for them. Vocations to the priesthood, religious life, marriage, and single life will all be discussed. Your program host is Father James Corda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of How is God Calling You? Today we're talking with the Sisters of Divine Providence, and joining me is Sister Lisa. It's nice to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And Sister, you are the considered the vocation coordinator for your community and for your province. Tell us a little bit about what's all involved with your work in vocations.
Well, a big part of it is working with the membership that's already among us, because how we see this is every one of us is an expert in consecrated life. We've lived it. And so we're there to invite other women that we see also maybe have a call to this life. So all of us are vocation ministers, and I coordinate that. And then I also coordinate any kind of vocation fairs we might have, or individuals that want to talk to somebody in vocation ministry.
You know, so often when we think of vocations nowadays, we try to, where we do talk in terms of numbers. But you know, numbers obviously is not the whole picture. Mm-hmm. You know, we'd be great if we had lots, but numbers is not the whole picture. In your work with vocations, how do you answer that, or how do you respond to that about numbers? Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, you're right. It's not about numbers. Vocations are really about God calling, and God calling to do something special. And any of us that are familiar with the Bible, the scriptures, we see that many times God calls the least among us to do the biggest tasks that God's calling us to. And so it's not about numbers, because God is the one that works through us to do what God needs to do in this world. And so if God has 5 people, God will do it through 5 people. If God has 200, God will do it through 200.
Now let's say that there's someone that's listening today that might feel that they have a call or a vocation to religious life, but inside they feel that they're not worthy or not holy enough. Or how do you respond to something like that?
Well, I'd probably respond to say, well, none of us feel worthy to be called by God to these wonderful blessings and these graces to do what God calls us to do. So, yeah, I think we all struggle with that. And then, you know, we have to keep increasing that self-esteem for the service that we're called to.
Is there a certain type of people that you look for in answering the call to religious life, or is it kind of an open thing? Like because I would imagine in the past with any vocation, you know, if you were always so holy, you always went to church, you always prayed, you always read the Bible, that's not always the mold that we find people responding to vocations fitting into. Has that been your experience?
No and yes. No, because, you know, when I look around my community and all the different provinces, there's such a diversity. And of course, Providence provides such a diversity of humanity, of creativity, of creation. However, I think the one thing I see is we're all passionate about the mission we're called to. And we all have worked at being a mature woman that's committed to the work that God calls us to. And I think God needs all types of people with all different gifts, so that what needs to be done can be done by this diversity of persons.
You know, you mentioned the word mission. How does that word mission play into the whole concept of vocation and religious life and community?
Everything, everything. It's the same mission that Jesus Christ came to establish on the earth, and that is to bring about the reign of God, to bring about this community that's united in love, to bring about the awareness that we are all one, and we've all come from the same source of love. And so the mission is to keep bringing us to that place.
The other word that comes to mind when I think of religious life is the word community. Obviously, that's an important part of religious life, is community. How and why is that a source of blessing, and how and why can that be a challenge?
Okay. Well, first of all, the word means with unity. And so really the unity, what unites us is that we are all passionate about this mission. That's what drew each of us, was the mission. Where the conflict could come in community is, we weren't called here because we're all going to get along. We're not called here because we're all alike and we all like the same things. And so it's like a family, it's like any organization or system, but you want to bring that conflict into the unity and stay focused on where we're all going together. And that's where we get the unity with.
When you're working with people who are interested in religious community, what are some of the first things that you would ask them to think about or to consider or to question?
Well, I think the first thing is, why do you feel that you're called to religious life? To try to uncover, what is the motivation? You know, what is it that you feel attracted to? And I think to talk about, you know, who you are in your life, to find out who that person is and what's already going on in their life. You know, I find that some women that are called, they're already into ministry. They're already into making God the center of their life. And they're looking for something to support that. So I think each person brings different gifts, and you have to keep looking to see, what is God calling here, and what is this about for this person? If that motivation is very shallow, or it's based on a non-reality, then you have to work with that person, either to go deeper, or maybe they're looking for something else.
You know, it's interesting because when you talk about that, sometimes it's hard for someone with a vocation to actually say, this is why I became a nun or why I became a priest. But that introspective look is really crucial, because it, I would imagine, sustains us in our vocation, in our religious life. So how does someone get to that intimacy within, and then also to be able to share that with others?
That could be different for each person, but I could talk about how that happened for myself.
Please.
Because when I look at my vocation, why I came and why I made a final commitment 9 years later are different. And hopefully it would be, because it deepened. Just like I talked about, you know, earlier, that there are deeper motivations. What helped me was being free to pursue the vocation and having the 9 years in a formation program that was all about discernment. You know, discerning, am I really the material, strong, able to do this? What about ministry? As I ministered, is this something that really is good for me and good for the people I'm ministering to? So as those questions arose about me really being in this lifestyle for the rest of my life, I got to answer those over a 9-year period, and I was free to leave at any time if I came up with a realization, this isn't working for me, or the community could say, this isn't working for us. And I think that's a good thing, you know, it was for me.
Now, there are probably folks that are with us who may not be Catholic even. who might be wondering, well, is this for me? How would you respond to something like that?
Well, in our particular community, being Catholic is a criteria for membership. And so they're right there, you know, because really it has to build on that foundation of faith and that unity that's going to carry us forward as a community.
When you are working with the women in your community, what are some of the things that you challenge one another to do to be people who foster a vocation or who live a vocation that others look up to as an example?
Well, I think, you know, you look at our culture right now, we're all busy. And so it's really being conscious of when someone really calls you to some concern, some questioning about this life. And, you know, to open their homes, that individual can come and maybe have a dinner with them or pray with them or maybe do a service with them. That's the one thing I remember growing up Catholic. I was always attracted to what the sisters were doing, and anytime I asked a question about that, they took the time to answer that question, and I felt like I was important. Watching them relate to one another was a whole new awareness for me of how women can really live and work together for something greater than themselves. So that mystery really attracted me, and the sisters took time to answer my questions. So that's a big part of inviting.
We are down to about 2 minutes left before we take a break. What I'd like also for us to share with the folks that are with us, sometimes the image that we get of religious life or of a sister is being in this big old house, this big old convent, not talking to anybody, praying all day long. What's religious life all about in the modern world?
Yeah, I think that what you just described might have been a little caricature of what life was when I entered back in the 60s. But today, you know, we're really freer. Because of Vatican II, we're freer to be an apostolic community. So we're women who are part of the laity, and we're really embedded in the body of Christ, and the people of God. So a lot of our life is really out and about in the ministry that we're called to. And then we come together in community and prayer. For me, it's living with two other sisters, one in retreat ministry, the other one in education. So the three of us bring a diversity, bring an awareness of how much bigger ministry is than just us.
Well, Sister Lisa, we certainly appreciate your presence on our show today. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to invite two other sisters from your community to share some more information with us.
Thank you very much.
Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
What have you done for your marriage today?
I gave my wife a hug this morning. I told her I love her.
Instead of sitting on the couch, I hope to clean up.
I cooked my husband's favorite breakfast.
I sent my husband a love email.
What have I done for my marriage today? It's a good question.
I gave her a call and say thinking of her and the kids.
I did her hair this morning. I think it looks pretty good.
We're going to the museums as a family.
What have I done for my marriage today?
I made my wife coffee and breakfast this morning.
It's going to be her birthday next week, so I've been spending time today making arrangements to make that extra special.
Oh, we're spending the day together?
I bought her an orchid.
Hassan was able to let me sleep in by taking care of him in the morning.
I read the newspaper to my wife, and it cracked her up. She's still laughing.
What have you done for your marriage today? Small changes can make a world of difference. Get started at foryourmarriage.org, a message from the Catholic Church.
Welcome back to our show. We're talking with the Sisters of Divine Providence. And now joining me is Sister Roseanne and Sister Lou. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much, Father.
Thank you.
We'd like to learn a little bit more about your community. So if you could tell us a little bit of the history of the Sisters of Divine Providence.
Well, the Sisters of Divine Providence were founded by Bishop Emanuel von Kettler and Mother Marie de la Roche in 1851 in Germany. And in 1876, a group of sisters came to the United States by way of Cleveland, except that the priest that invited us forgot to tell the bishop. And so we eventually came to Pittsburgh and established our community, worked with the German immigrants there, mostly in schools and then later in hospital work. And presently, our sisters are involved not only in teaching, hospitals, social work, parish ministry, and a number of other avenues that continue to bring the gospel to the world.
You know, when we talk about religious community, we always talk about their particular charism. And we know that every community has their own charism. Sister Lou, can you share with us, first of all, what a charism is and what particular charism is about your community?
Okay. Charism is really the spirit of what drives us. It is different for each community because it's how God calls us to be Providence or of charity or whatever to the people of God. For our particular community, it is of Providence, and what we are is how can we be reaching out to one another in the name of God. We're invited into a relationship, and our symbol is very strongly speaks of that it is a triangle. It is if you notice, a little more of a softened edge, a curved edge, because a women's community, it makes a little more sense that way, but it's a triangle nonetheless. And the interlocking symbols of the triune God, we have been invited into the relationship with that God, and by doing so, a dynamic going forth and sharing that providence with the world, with anyone that we can in God's name.
On our show earlier, we talked with Sister Lisa, and one of the things I had mentioned to her is how, and she had mentioned how important it is to kind of get into your own self and to understand why it is that I chose this particular vocation in life. So I think I'd like to know a little bit about why each of you chose not just this particular order, but religious life. Sister Roseanne, why did you choose religious life, and what was going on in your young life?
Well, I really went to what was then called our prep school at the age of 13. At that time, I really didn't choose religious life. And you're a little bit too young to do that at that point in time. But God had a way of moving us in the direction He wants us to go. It was really my cousin who wanted to become a religious. And she sort of drugged me along with her. And God's way of speaking to me and my way of coming to know my vocation was to be with the sisters both in our preparatory school and then to enter the community. But my real commitment to religious life didn't come until I took my final vows 9 years after I entered. And it was through a directed retreat that I finally came to understand that I really did have a call to religious life. The Sisters of Divine Providence were important to me because they had taught me in grade school. And so I felt comfortable with that community. But it was the directed retreat that really put me in touch with the fact that I had something to offer that God had gifted me, and that I wanted to share those gifts with others, and religious life was one way to do that.
And Sister Lou, what's your experience?
Well, I had a much later experience. I had a life before this life. That's how I explain it to most people. When I was in school, I was taught by a different community, so I had no contact with the Sisters of the Divine Providence until I met this lady right here. I happened to be teaching high school in Dover, Ohio, and going to church where she was teaching at the time. And we got to know each other through the folk group and decorating and different things. And we got to kind of just get to know each other. We corresponded when she moved away and some things, and when I did go to meet her, I finally felt like I had a freedom to talk about my faith. It was like this total outpouring of something that I never had the opportunity to do so before. So all the things I did before brought me to that point, and even beyond. It's now, where has God brought me in, through the years. But it was totally a different route, because I worked in offices, I taught high school, and I worked at Girl Scout camps and everything else, and then I found out that this was something I really wanted to do. But it took time too. Took almost 9 years as well there. So we had time to explore, to discern exactly what.
And how often is it that when we talk about responding to a call for religious life or priesthood, that there's someone that we look up to? There's some example that's out there. And oftentimes when I'm asked, and I can point to a priest that I had in high school, and I would say that's why I was interested, or that's why I wanted to pursue that vocation. And so being an example is very important.
Very important.
And how do you believe the two of you are examples to others to pursue, perhaps, or to look into religious life? What kind of example can you be to them?
Well, I guess I try in my daily life, in whatever I do, to present the fact that I'm not doing this for myself, that this is something to, I think as Sister Lisa mentioned earlier, that I'm really passionate about bringing about the reign of God, and I'm very open with the fact that I have come to know my own giftedness from God. And always one of the scripture quotes that has been my mantra has been, what you receive as gift, you give as gift. And my parents had taught me that, religious life taught me that. And I think that's something that, first of all, we have to let people know that our giftedness is not just for us, that there's someplace else that God is calling us to give that. And I try to do that in my ministry to the homebound, in my Bible studies, in whatever I'm doing at the time. And I think actions speak louder than words. And I'm hoping, and I think I do from feedback, let people know that this is something that brings joy to my life too. And so it's not something that you have to be thinking that you're giving everything up, because you're not. You get twice as much back.
And I'd like to pick up on that word joy. You know, sometimes when we think of our work, statistics tell us that 70% of the people just dislike what they're doing. That's a high percentage of people that just hate their work. So what kind of joy do you have in your life and in your work in ministry? One of the happiest times of the whole week is when I greet people before and after Mass. Or it can be other things too, but it's being with the people. And sometimes I've been known as the hugging nun. After Mass, you know, people sometimes will line up. It is a joy to me to be with the people, and sometimes to hear people say, oh, I really needed that. I haven't had a hug in how long? I just needed your hug. I had to wait for it. It's being with people, and everything I do then flows from that. It sort of feeds me. So when I do have computer work or whatever, I know there's much more to it. And of course, it's ultimately for the kingdom of God. We're getting down to the last couple of minutes of our time together. What I'd like us to consider is the folks that are with us might have inclinations towards a religious community or religious life, or maybe there's there's an emptiness within them that they need fulfilled. What question can you share with them to get them to think or get them to discern a little deeper of considering religious life or work very closely within the church? What would you get them to consider, to think about in a question form?
I would first think of what is motivating them right now. Where is that leading them? Why are they questioning it in the first place? That there might be something that they have within them that is there. So they may have the answer themselves. But it would be to look within and also to look to someone that they admire, they recognize as somebody as a good example.
Sister Roseanne?
Yeah, and I think the same thing. And I think it's good to say, do you know someone who is in religious life? Get to know them better. Spend some time with them. Ask them some questions. Share your concerns and your faith life, and see where it leads.
Now, when we talk about the Sisters of Divine Providence, tell us specifically for you, what does that divine providence mean?
It is the ultimate experience of God, knowing that God is truly in command of the situation, and all it takes is us to work with God.
And that God can bring good out of every situation, that God's providence is there for us to work with.
In the good and the bad.
In the good and the bad,
Yes.
right.
Well, we certainly appreciate your presence on our show today. What we'd like to do is to close with some information. We do know that your community has kind of worked with other groups and other communities, and how important has that been in the life of your congregation to work with others?
I think one of the biggest things is our better understanding of what providence is, and the support that is gained from joining with people of the same charism has been very energizing.
Yeah, there's more people. It's more than just you. That is so encouraging.
Well, Sister Lou, Sister Roseanne, I certainly appreciate your presence on our show today. God bless you in your particular vocations and in your ministry. We certainly wish all of you well.
Thank you so much.
And thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Have a nice day, and God be with you.
How is God Calling You is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Corda.
$33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.